I don't think anybody behind a microphone is in a position to judge how any Grand Prix driver should react when there's a yellow, a flashing yellow, a slow car, a stop car, because all that comes under the heading of A, split-second timing, and B, safety. So no journalist out there, if indeed they are journalists, should be making that call. But then he's got this incredibly sort of Senna-like steely look in his eyes. It looks like he's a very calm, river, but in the background there's this volcano somewhere that's going to explode at any moment. Lando must be feeling sick as a dog this morning on a Monday. There's nothing worse than being ahead of your teammate on points, being in theory the lead driver because you got more experience, you won more races, blah, 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 and waking up knowing that guy's just driven a blitzingly brilliant race and you've been, P4. Would Daniel Ricciardo have won that race yesterday in Oscar Piastri's car? Because he's pretty good at driving that sort of race, old Daniel, isn't he?
Depends which iteration of Daniel Ricciardo you're talking about, isn't it? Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest F1 mind to have ever goated, the one that they call Peter D. Windsor. How are you keeping, good sir?
I'm very well, Cameron. Actually, I've just noticed that my YouTube handle, if that's the right word, they've knocked the D out of it now. It's just at Peter Windsor. The Twitter one, and I'm going to keep calling it Twitter because that's what it was before its current owner took over, is D. But the YouTube one is without the D, interestingly.
They
confused by that.
Hold on, Peter. Are you saying that they changed it without your permission? I don't think Elon should be doing that, if I'm honest.
Well, no, he didn't. YouTube's handle is just my name without the D. So I don't know which handle to use. I'm going to use the YouTube one. I don't really want to use the Musk one. Thank you very much.
I know. I would agree with you. I would agree with you.
Although I've got to say, to get those astronauts back wasn't bad, was it? That's the thing, isn't it? He does some very good things, but then again, anyway, let's not go down that path.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Peter. He's very topical / polemic character is Mr. Musk. Shall we talk about some F1-age, Peter?
Yeah, let's
because
do
there's
that.
been a lot going on over the past weekend. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix. As is customary, what do you think was the biggest story to come out of this weekend's automotive pugilism?
Well, I got to say Oscar Piastri, because what a win. That was absolutely as good a win as you're going to see, actually. If you go back through the hundreds of books that I've got in my library, let alone everybody else's library books as well, you won't see anything that much better than Oscar's drive yesterday. Really, really good. I've always said from day one in Formula One, he's got that lovely, subtle, light touch that allows him to open a whole lot of doors within his palette of skill. And one of those quite early on was getting into the corners a bit earlier and shortening the corner, lengthening the straights, whatever you want to call it, which Lando's not done really. I mean, he's got a little bit of it, but not to the extent of Oscar already. And but they both got similar levels of sensitivity, I think, and suppleness. But what I've never really noticed before, or talked about before, because I never really noticed it, was how good he is now at Perez-like traction episodes, if that's what they like to call it. He's really good on linear application of power. And yeah, occasionally the back end got away with him. Great car control in true Alan Jones tradition, but also really good in the way he puts the power down. I thought it was quite interesting at one point in the race when Lando's engineer got onto the radio and said, imagine that Stella's on your shoulder saying 0 wheel spin on every corner. I was confused by that because to my eye, Lando's never, ever had a problem in terms of wheel spin out of slow corners and traction. He's very good in that. I mean, if anything, I would have always said he needs to get into the corners a bit earlier and just basically make life a little bit easier for himself and give himself a more stable platform before rotation point, as Oscar does. But they're talking about wheel spin with Lando. I found that very odd that they would say that, but I don't know, maybe whenever we don't see Lando, he's out there throwing the thing sideways with massive amounts of wheel spin. I've never seen it, but that's what they were saying to him, which is odd. Anyway, getting back to Oscar, and just resilience under pressure as well. And that's a sign not only of obviously of how good he is, but equally of how mentally calm he is and how structured he is in his brain. I was watching some footage of him just walking into the track on Sunday morning, and there's something about his demeanor, which is a cross between, I've mentioned it several times, a cross between the sort of laconic Frank Gardner Australian, where he's really good at summing everything up with just a couple of words, like when he got the checkered flag. I don't know how you say thank you in Azerbaijan, but there you go. That's pretty cool, isn't it? But then he's got this incredibly sort of Senna-like steely look in his eyes, and it's an amazing combination. And you feel like, whoa, I don't know what to say to this guy. He's just this sort of, it looks like he's a very calm, river, but in the background, there's this volcano somewhere that's going to explode at any moment, but in a controlled way. And he had no compunction about passing Charles on the hard tires when he got near him. And then you can't drive that well under pressure unless you have a very, very good mental structure of the lap, which enables you to focus on every little thing that you've got to do next in a very structured way, without thinking, wow, he's still in my mirrors or this or that. And so you leave your mind completely free to be able to just react naturally to whatever's going on around you. And if you see that Charles has suddenly moved left, yeah, okay, all right, we'll just move a little bit to the left, and then I'll just move to the right when I know he's got no chance to get me. And all that happens in a very relaxed, calm way when you have that measure of structure. And that's just happened naturally. For sure, that's a natural thing for him, that basically says, right, sports psychologist, not needed, because he doesn't need it. He's got all that mental capacity anyway, because he's freeing up his brain with all this lovely structure that he's got. Whereas Charles, I think, is a more emotional driver. And I think what we saw in that battle with Charles and Oscar, full marks for Charles to just constantly being there in the mirrors. Not an easy thing. The heat from the car in front, the damage to the tires, the engine overheating, various other things, the coolants. All those things are a problem, and it's probably why he was less able to manage the tires at Baku than he was at, say, Monza. But I think there were also moments when, excuse me, when Charles was guilty of being a little bit over emotional in it, because there was a time of about a 15-lap period where he could have given himself a bit of free air just to let everything breathe and settle and get the tire temperatures right for a sort of 5-lap burst, and then got the added advantage of Oscar thinking, just as his tires are really starting to go off, oh, look, Charles right on me. And that might have had some effect. But Charles never did that. He was constantly there. And egged on by the pit wall, actually, which I thought was a bit odd. All this, don't give up, keep going, Charles. This is a great fight. It's not what he I don't think that's what Charles needed to hear. What Charles needed to hear was just relax, let the tire temperatures be what they be. If you're getting hot, just back off a little bit. For sure, at some point, Oscar's tires are going to go off. That's what he wanted to hear. Not, this is a great fight, keep at it. And I think to some extent that was what did the damage, because in terms of his real opportunity to win. And then obviously right at the end, his tires had gone off dramatically compared with Oscar's. As I say, because he'd spent so many laps behind the guy, that was the problem. And I suppose also you have to say that Monza itself played a role, because there would have been moments when Charles and the pit wall, I guess, the Ferrari pit wall, was saying, well, his tires are bound to go off at some point. What's going on here? As they did at Monza. But what happened at Monza, as I said clearly at the time, was it was Oscar was racing Lando. That was the problem. And they were racing at McLaren pace on those tires. And here he was just racing at Ferrari pace. So it was a much easier, not easier, but it was a much more straightforward task facing Oscar. And he did it beautifully. So, yeah. There are plenty of other things to talk about. Lando's race, Max's race, but I mean, in terms of the outstanding element of that Grand Prix, it has to be the way Oscar Piastri exhibited not only great pace into corners and using less road than a lot of drivers, but also Perez-like, almost Perez-like in the way he was coming out of corners at Baku. Just great combination. If you put the two together, no wonder he won that Grand Prix, you could almost say. I mean, definitely better than Charles in terms of exits.
He wasn't bad, was he, Oscar Jack, Peter? And you know what? I always tend to, as far as the way I ingest my Formula One, I've always been invested in greatness, not when they arrive at the mountaintop, but on the journey to it, almost that uncertainty. Will Oscar actually end up delivering on this promise of of his not insubstantial, unfulfilled potential. And I feel like yesterday, Peter, we saw him rising from the flames like a phoenix, and stamping his authority, the clinicism of the overtake and the steeliness in defence. It was just, I thought it was beautiful, Peter. And again, this makes you think, mate, I have been questioning why McLaren haven't been effecting team orders up until this point season to date. And then Oscar puts in a performance like that, then you're wondering, well, in the medium to long term, shouldn't their priority be Oscar Piastri, if indeed his ceiling, as it looked yesterday, is so much higher than Lando Norris's potentially?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I said that from the minute Oscar joined the team, and because I said, if you got Lando Norris, you certainly don't need Oscar Piastri, and that's another way of saying, if you got Oscar Piastri, it doesn't matter who you put in the other car. But the point is, they did have Lando Norris, and they did renew him on a long-term contract around the basis of being the face of McLaren and the future of McLaren, Lando Norris, megastar. And so that doesn't compute with what you've just said, and indeed what I think, which is if you got Oscar Piastri, you might as well put, Guan Yu Zhou in the other car, because you're going to do a lot of winning. And so to me, it's still a very odd situation, because I'm not a fan of compromising one driver for the expense of the other. And people say, oh, well, Windsor's a Lando Norris fan. I'm not necessarily a Lando Norris fan any more than I am an Oscar Piastri fan. I just think that if you're Lando Norris, you're confused now, because they obviously didn't say to him when they renewed with the long-term contract, you do realize, Lando, that Oscar's a bit quicker than you at the moment, and there's going to be problems, and you're here not insisting on being number one. That's fine. We'll support you all the way, but realize it's going to be like that. And Lando obviously never thought that. So there we are in this situation now, where Lando, regardless of all the stuff about rah, great team result, brilliant drive up to fourth place from P15 and whatever he was on the grid, Lando must be feeling sick as a dog this morning on a Monday. There's nothing worse than being ahead of your teammate on points, being in theory the lead driver because you got more experience, you won more races, blah, 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 and waking up knowing that guy's just driven a blitzingly brilliant race and you've been, P4. That's the worst feeling in the world if it's your teammate. So, this is not going to have a great effect on Lando, I don't think.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing is with Lando, I'd like you, Peter, think Lando is absolutely brilliant. His speed is ridiculous. You don't gap the rest of the field to the tune of 3/10 during Austrian qualifying, a lap that's like 60 seconds long. If you aren't a brilliant peddler in an F1 machine. However, Lando keeps making mistakes, doesn't he, Peter? And I want to talk to you about this yellow flag gate, because again, the community has done one of these as far as its opinion. I hear different things. What was your take on Lando easing off and abandoning his Q1 lap because of the flashing light? Should he have done that, or should he have done like George Russell did when he saw Carlos Sainz parked up down the runoff area and kept his foot in, minimal blip just to show, like you do in karting, raise your hand to just acknowledge the yellow flag, but as you were really, and going hell for leather with a view to make it through to Q2?
Well, I don't think anybody behind a microphone is in a position to judge how any Grand Prix driver should react when there's a flashing yellow, a slow car, a stop car, because all that comes under the heading of A, split-second timing, and B, safety. So no journalist out there, if indeed they are journalists, should be making that call. Equally, I don't think the team should be putting the pressure on the drivers to have to do a lap that'll get them through to Q2 with 30 seconds to go. I think that's completely wrong in Q1. Q2, maybe. Then you run them pretty light on fuel. Q3, obviously you're on the limit. Q1, to me, the absolute no doubt about the real cause of the problem in Q1 in Baku, it was McLaren bringing both drivers in with 5 minutes to go before the end of Q1, when they were potentially on the bubble. And so was Charles Leclerc the lap before, all three of them. And Charles Leclerc instead stayed out, and his medium tire and his soft tire had done 5 laps by then. And then he got 1 lap out of them, and he immediately went to P1 or P2 on a 6-lap old set of soft tires. Instead, McLaren, with 5 minutes to go, brought both drivers in simultaneously as well, which is not a great thing, because there's a lot of stuff going on if you got both cars in. Presumably, because they didn't put new tires on or anything, presumably fuel. I can't imagine any other reason why they would have brought them in at that point and then sent them out. And quite clearly then they only had time for one lap left. And there were 18 cars on track at that point. The only two in the garage were Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez. And there were 18 cars on track. So when you start saying, oh, flashing yellow, stationary yellow, this yellow, red, whatever it is, forget it. It's nothing to do with the drivers. Absolutely for sure. If you've got to get one lap in with 18 cars on track on a circuit like Baku, there's going to be a drama. You never, ever put yourself in that situation. And again, I have to question why McLaren were doing that. It just comes under the heading of very poor management, I think. Unless there's something I'm missing here, why they had to come in with 5 minutes to go in Q1. I just don't get it. I mean, what front flap adjustment? Would that have been it? I don't know. Both cars doesn't seem logical, does it? Can only be fuel. And if that's the case, why were they running so light in Q1? They had probably the fastest car around Baku. We knew that at the time. Why were they running so marginal on fuel in Q1? Doesn't make any sense to me at all. And I think it's completely wrong to criticize Lando at all for any of that, because he was actually up on Oscar in Sector 1 and Sector 2. And then he comes out of, whatever it was, turn 15, and the dreaded Esteban Ocon is again going slowly or almost stationary around the circuit. And I don't in any way, I mean, unlike, I think it was Andrea Stella said, oh, they made a big mistake. They should have put out a white flag instead of a yellow flag. I think that's completely uncalled for comment as well, because if you're a marshal and you've got a slow car coming towards you and suddenly that very slow car slows down even more, which is what Esteban Ocon did, because he saw Lando there and he almost came to a stop just to let him go, to make sure he wasn't in the way. If you're a marshal and you've already seen that Ocon car going around the circuit mega slowly twice already, whatever it was over the weekend, yeah, if he wants to put out a yellow thinking the guy's actually going to stop, he's doing it for safety reasons. Nothing wrong with it. Okay, it was only on for about 6 seconds, but that happens all the time in practice and qualifying. We see yellows coming on. And on that lap, the yellow had come out between turns 4 and 5 for Ocon as well.
Yeah.
And the two Haas Ferraris had caught the back end of the yellow there. So any team on the ball would have been aware that that's going to happen. Another reason not to leave it all to the last 30 seconds of Q1 to get your driver up. And that's, this is what Gilles Villeneuve was all about when, sadly, that led up to his accident, that you should never, ever be in a situation in qualifying where you've got, in his case, one last set of mixed qualifying tires on which to do a time, and you've got to dodge in and out of all the slow cars, which eventually led to his accident. As we say, and he went on and on about that for months before the accident happened, and he was totally correct to do it. Very few drivers backed him up on it. And it's a similar thing. You never, ever want to have your drivers, particularly if you're in a quick car, out on the circuit with 18 other cars. Well, sorry, 16 other cars, because they're two, aren't they? 16 other cars with 30 seconds to go. What's that all about? Why did McLaren need to take that risk? That's my take on it.
Yeah, you know what, Peter? From the safety perspective, I can't disagree, right? But I'm reminded of Kimi Räikkönen when he went through the plume of smoke, completely blind, zero visibility, kept his foot into the deep 100% on the throttle. And I just think, again, my comparison is George, right? That George saw what was going on in Q1, that there was a yellow flag, but he was prepared to ask for forgiveness as versus permission, knowing that what was at stake was a place, ultimately a podium, and a place in Q2. And I just think Lando, I think it's race savvy. I think he kind of lacks, I think the mistakes and the starts and kind of the mental fortitude or lack thereof all comes under the umbrella of race savvy or lack thereof. And I think, I mean, if that was George, or if that were Lewis, or if that were Max, Peter, do you think they'd completely back out the lap and come in the pits like that? They would complete the lap, and I think they would have been crafty enough to.
As I say,
lift.
I don't think, I don't want to put myself in a position to judge that, because if I was a Formula One driver, I'd also be very aware of the number of times drivers have lost laps because they haven't backed off for yellows. We've seen that. I remember even Jenson Button had that, and he's one of the most cautious drivers we've ever seen in Formula One, from memory, and then McLaren at one point. And so I don't think you can talk about a driver's propensity to go for it when they see a yellow, with actually being a very good fast racing driver who can take risks. I don't think the two are compatible at all. I think one of them is a sort of, oh, I don't really care. I'm on a quick lap. I'm going to go for it. Another one is real track craft and talent. And if you want a George Russell, you don't sign Lando Norris. We all know what Lando Norris is like. He's a really good bloke. He's a very pure racing driver. And you know that if anybody's going to back off for yellow, it's going to be Lando Norris. So none of us should be surprised, least of all the McLaren people, because they know what he's like. And if they don't want him to do that, yeah, go and hire, somebody else. But I don't think, what you're talking about are not racing driver things. They're just ways of approaching the FIA and rules. It's not, I don't give George any bonus points for being like that any more than I give Lando negative points. I just think that that's the way they want to handle it. That's fine, but that doesn't reflect on their ability to drive a racing car or to be aggressive in a racing car. And I don't in any way, I blame the McLaren management completely. I don't blame Lando. And they blame, they know what Lando's like as a racing driver. They should do by now. And if he sees a yellow, he's going to back off. He's that sort of guy. And I respect him for that. And I think everybody should respect him for that. I mean, what's wrong with that? You never, ever really know, do you? Exactly why the yellow is coming out. You never know. As the marshal maybe tried to jump over the fence and broken his ankle and he's half hanging over the Armco barrier, hidden by the car. A million things could be going on. Maybe a cat's run across the track in front of the Ocon car. It's not clever to say, it's not clever for George to say, oh, well, I'm going to go for it anyway. Well, what's clever about that? That's just dangerous, actually, to be honest. I mean, George doesn't need to prove his virility or his bravery. We see that in the race car anyway. Doesn't need to do that by going through yellows. And I think Lando did the right thing and McLaren did completely the wrong thing. I just can't imagine what they were thinking. I couldn't believe it when they both came in. I could not believe it.
No, McLaren haven't been fantastic as far as competing for 25 points. And it was their ineptitude. I agree with you, Peter. But I just think, I can't help but think, if we're comparing Lando, if we're talking about Lando as a potential championship rival in 24 for challenging Maximilian Verstappen, I think you've got to put on that.
He does in many ways, but not in disregarding yellows. I don't think those 2 points are compatible at all. But yeah, I agree with you. In certain other ways, he needs to enforce his talent and his ability a lot more. I agree. But, all this business of, Lando, can you try and hold up Perez a bit in sector 2? That'll really help Oscar. Thanks so much, mate. Surprised he didn't come back and say, well, I thought I did a lot of help in Hungary. Do I still have to do more? Come on. And it was a ludicrous thing anyway, because as we all knew, Perez immediately caught the next bunch and it didn't actually change things at all. And right at the end, they're saying, oh, Lando, thanks so much. You played such a role in that. You really helped Oscar. How did that help Oscar? I mean, Perez was never, ever going to beat Oscar Piastri, and he was never anywhere near him.
I think McLaren were concerned about the undercut. I mean, they put the metric up on screen, right, showing that, but for Lando doing his team ethos thing and holding up Checo, that there was a very real risk of Checo pulling the undercut on Oscar Piastri. And I think that's what they were concerned about. But why didn't they pit? Why didn't they just mirror what Checo had done and pit Oscar on the very next lap? I don't know, Peter.
They kind of did, I think. It was pretty soon afterwards. But I don't know. I mean, to me, the whole point was how quickly Perez was able to catch them anyway. So he quickly nullified any holding up that Lando had done. Lando did a good job. I thought it was quite funny for Perez to say, he's holding me up. I hope you guys can see that. I don't remember him saying anything like, I'm holding him up, when it was Abu Dhabi 21 with Lewis behind him anyway. But, that's motor racing, isn't it?
This is indeed motor racing.
I mean, I think the real point is that sort of over-the-top gratitude to Lando for helping Oscars win. It just rubs it in to Lando. It's about the worst thing you could say to a driver who's just finished fourth when his teammates won the Grand Prix. And he's only finished fourth because he had to stop, or McLaren told him to stop 5 minutes from the end of Q1, and he got a yellow on his last lap, and he would easily have got into Q2,
100%.
Would easily have got into Q3, and he probably would have qualified top 3 and maybe even won the race. So the last thing you want to hear is, oh, thank you so much for helping Oscars win. That was brilliant, Lando.
Yeah, the communication is a bit techie, isn't it? Treat them like grown men. Treat them
It's
like grown men and
ridiculous.
not little boys. But again, Lando leans into that with some of his modes of communication over the radio, and he's just always very and
Well,
Charles too, to a certain extent, always very yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full, sir.
well, yeah, Lando is particularly, wasn't he? How's the car? The car's great. Yeah, sure, I'll try and hold them up. Yeah, anything else I can do? Yeah, don't worry. Next time I'm leading, I'll let Oscar pass. Don't worry, everything will be fine.
It's bonkers. No, it's not great. Go on then, Peter. Talk to me about Checo Perez, because I, for one, have
Yeah.
been very critical of him and said on many occasions that Red Bull should jettison him, that there's more risk to keeping him than there is to letting him go and doing as Williams have done and putting Colapinto in for Sargent. And then, of course, as he does tend to do at Baku, he roundly outperforms Maximilian Verstappen and has himself a sterling performance. Not to mention that would be not necessarily wholly attributable to a cheeky session with your old mate Rob Wilson in a sports car at Silverstone, but impartial.
Not a sports car, a basic touring car.
Just a...
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, look at that. Okay, so talk to me about the incident. Who done it between... if you're laying blame at somebody's door, the incident between Sainz and Checo Perez in the last stages of the Grand Prix, who takes most of the blame, Peter?
Well, it was a very... I mean, I blame DRS, to be honest. There you go.
Let's go.
DRS caused the big mess into turn one. And obviously, Perez's tyres were in better shape than Leclerc's at that point. So in theory, he should have made a clean pass on Charles. But because the Red Bull's so relatively slow in a straight line, relatively slow, he wasn't quite able to pull it off. But DRS got him near enough to be able to cause a mess. And so Charles did a good job of sort of defending, as a result of which Sergio ran wide out of turn one, creating a beautiful gap for Carlos Sainz, who'd driven really well in the second half of the race, pretty much standard Carlos Sainz stuff.
Yeah.
Where was he on the mediums? To get the run down into turn two, and Carlos had it, and that was really good. So at that point into turn two, he runs a little bit wide, but you've got Carlos Sainz, the Spaniard, thinking, yes. You got Sergio Perez, the Mexican, thinking, I almost P2 and now I'm P3. I can't believe this.
Yeah.
And was it P3 or P4 by then? Hang on, it would have been, yeah. So it would have been, yeah, almost. So you got Sergio Perez thinking, I was almost going to be P2 and now I've lost that position to Carlos Sainz. So I'm P4 now. What a disaster. And they're accelerating now along that straight, that very narrowish straight, which is DRS, of course. And presumably Checo's got the DRS there. And he goes left, as he should, because he's got the run and he's got the DRS, and Sainz is on the right. And he's kind of in the middle of the road doing what he should be doing, totally relieved that he's got that position and he's now effectively got the inside for the next right-hander. And I don't think what happened next was anything more than just a little racing incident and very narrow track. And also speed differential. I keep making the point about DRS. And Sainz moving slightly to the left, Perez moving slightly to the right. And quite often in Formula One, we do often see cars touch and they kind of get away with it. Austria coming out of turn three, you see it quite a lot.
Yep.
But when they're going quite quickly on, in fifth or sixth gear. But here it was just the wrong angle and there was an interlock because there was a slight difference in angle of steering and it just pushed Perez left and Carlos was hooked into it and into the wall. So unfortunate. Both relatively clean drivers. You'd normally not expect. I don't think there was anything dirty about that. It was all just too much because of DRS. As I've always said, you don't need DRS at Baku because there's so much effect from the toe anyway. And it was just a sort of messy, discombobulating speed differential into one and then out of two that caused it.
And such a shame for Checo as well. I mean,
such a shame for Checo. I mean, just getting on to that point, he did drive extremely well all weekend, as I said from my Friday video onwards, how well he was driving. And it's not that he just loves Baku and loves the food in Azerbaijan or, loves looking at the museums. It's that he is really good on those sorts of corners. And there are plenty of them in Baku. That sort of nice acceleration runs out of 90-degree corners is absolutely the perfect corner for Sergio Perez. That's what he does better than anybody else in Formula One. I still think he does. Certainly better than Max. And that's what he did. And I think what Rob did was definitely tidy up Perez in the approach to corners and giving him more stability to be able to maximize what he does so well. There's no way Rob would have been working on transition point to exit, full exit with Perez, because he's just so good there. Yeah. It's all about what he does with the car going into corners, and that's where he's always been vulnerable. And Rob's tidied that up really nicely, and that's what we saw, and it worked really well. I think, to be honest, it worked pretty well around Monza. I mean, he was with Max in the first stint, wasn't he? It was only the second stint he fell away because the car was obviously not that good, and there were more variables that then needed to be managed. And then this sort of, the difficulty of getting the car into the first Lesmo, the second Lesmo would have been a bit too much for Perez. But I think around Baku, those sorts of issues were never going to be there. And he just floated around. He just looked beautiful in the car. The question is why Max was so slow in the race. And that's a really difficult question to answer. He said afterwards, we had this sort of bouncing rear end thing, and we know what the fix is, but obviously by then the car was in parc ferme and they could do nothing about it. Sounds like a damping thing of some sort, doesn't it? I don't think it's a ride height thing. It's probably damping. And but if that's the case, why did he go in that direction and not Perez? Possibly because Perez is already feeling that the car was just right on exits, and Max was just asking a bit more of the car, and they went, what did they do? Probably went stiffer on rebound. Would that be right to get that? And now,
he went for
they'll make that change obviously for Singapore. But interesting, isn't it? It's interesting.
It is interesting.
I mean, and we talk about the Adrian Newey effect, and ever since Adrian's left, but then again, if we assume that there was a big change for Red Bull after China before Miami, when Adrian was still running the car, let's take Silverstone as a good example. At least he got one really good stint out of Max, didn't he? At least they got the setup right for a bit of the race. They don't seem to be able to get the setup for Max right for any of the race at the moment, and that's a big issue.
But he did say, did Max, that the issue, I mean, he'd pushed the envelope ever so slightly as far as the setup. He'd made an additional edge just before qualifying and making the car worse than it had been in free practice, more oversteery, and that's why you see him doing the Drift King thing, as did Charles and
well, that's
Oscar.
what I say. I think they made some damping tweak that before qualifying, and then they couldn't do anything about that in parc ferme. So it looked, I'm saying damping because that's an assumption on my part, but if he's talking constantly about bouncing and the rear axle feeling very light, maybe that's the area that they're talking about. Wow. Maybe not. I mean, maybe there's more to it, but if it's, it's a subtle difference between his car and Perez, it's going to be something like that.
Yeah, blimey, Peter. This is chaos now for the rest
of
the
season. Well, it is, and it isn't. I mean, maybe it is in terms of the Constructors' Championship, but in terms of the Drivers' Championship, again, if you're McLaren and Lando Norris, you want to be taking maximum advantage of every race in which Max Verstappen isn't doing very well. That's the moments you want to be scoring your firsts or your seconds or perhaps your thirds when Max is in a fifth place or sixth place. And they're not doing that. They will, believe me, Max will come back, Red Bull will come back, and they'll win more races before the end of the year. But the time for Lando Norris and McLaren to be capitalizing has been over the last three races, and it isn't happening. And that's the problem. That's the problem. Instead of which McLaren are sort of floating along, and now they're on this whole new thing of the Oscar Piastri thing, which of course they have to be on. And it was inevitable that Oscar was going to do what he's doing to Lando. And I've been saying that for a year and a half already. And from the minute they got rid of Daniel Ricciardo.
Oh, chaos.
What's the point? Would Daniel Ricciardo have won that race yesterday in Oscar Piastri's car? Because he's pretty good at driving that sort of race, old Daniel, isn't he?
Depends which iteration of Daniel Ricciardo you're talking about, isn't it, Peter?
The iteration of this, was it the sprint race in Miami or something where he drove quite well?
He was well, but I mean, the Daniel
I know
Ricciardo,
what you're saying.
Yeah, the
okay,
Daniel
well, let's
Ricciardo
talk about
that first
Daniel.
came in the
Daniel,
car,
as
right?
he was before he got psyched out by Max, he could have won that race. He could have driven the race that Piastri did. Could he not?
1,000%. Danny Rick that was handing Sebastian's butt to him when he first came on, like Mr. Late Breaking. In fact, I was reminded of Danny Rick, the nature of the Oscar overtake on Charles it was so late, 20 meters before, like he
Yeah,
massively caught Charles
very
by
Daniel
surprise.
Ricciardo
Very
Hungarian
Danny
Grand
Rick.
Prix, wasn't it?
Yes, very, very
Yeah,
Danny Rick-esque.
yeah,
Finally, Mr. Windsor, who's around third base. I need to pick your brain on this
yeah.
because George Russell spoke. Mercedes are having trouble with tyres. They keep struggling. And George Russell said something.
I saw in their press release, they say, as many other teams do. Yeah, well, except McLaren and Ferrari and Red Bull, their nearest opposition. But yeah, the others do, for sure. Sauber struggle big time, Mercedes, yeah.
But it's weird,
What a
George's
thing to
comments.
say.
It is weird. But
Oh,
George's
sorry, and something else I think they said, and they what did they didn't say they swapped tires. They they got rid of the mediums like they were, horrendous tires. That wasn't great use of the word for Pirelli's point of view, but anyway.
Exactly, and this is George Russell's thesis, right? He was super damning about Pirelli, saying that in the first stint on the mediums, that Mercedes was like P20, but then all of a sudden they put on the hards, and George feels like the car all of a sudden is a world beater, and he reckons that Pirelli have to trend this chaos theory of tyre compound lottery down to zero, that they've got to go away and do something and put some due diligence in and around their tyres, and that Mercedes, the boys and girls at Brackley and Brixworth, are to take no blame. What do you make it? How do you respond?
I think it's complete nonsense, because if there was a big difference between one set of softs and another, or one set of mediums than another, it would be showing up and down the pit lane, but it's not showing up at McLaren. I wonder why. Maybe it is to tiny degrees, but no more than you would ever have got with Bridgestone or Michelin anyway, or Goodyear for that matter. So yeah, I mean, if you've got a tiny sweet spot in which you're operating the car in terms of balance for the grip level you want, obviously one set of tires might tip it over the edge and another won't. But if you've got a larger sweet spot, as McLaren have, you can accommodate all those variables. So you can't blame Pirelli for that. And it's nonsense to do so, in my opinion. And I think it's wrong to do it anyway, because I think Pirelli need to be looked after. I think Formula One should have learnt its lesson when they kicked Michelin into touch, to the point where Michelin will probably never, ever come back into Formula One because they were so badly treated politically. And I think everybody in Formula One should have learnt from that. And right now we should be treating Pirelli with a lot more respect, because they alone are in there supporting Formula One, spending, I don't know how much on Formula One. Yes, of course they could build better tires, but why do they need to? Because they're in a monopoly. What they need to do is find the balance between technology and doing a great job for the sport in terms of PR and marketing, all of which they do. I think they found the perfect balance. You could criticize Pirelli if there were 5 blowouts yesterday for no reason whatsoever, but you can't criticize Pirelli if on your specific type of car, there's a difference between one type of medium tire and another type of medium tire. That's nothing to do with Pirelli. That's to do with Mercedes not accommodating the differences between the tires.
Oof. Very well said, sir. Very well said. I thought it was very interesting from Mr. Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk.
Well, and I did say in my preview to the race that I thought George would have a very good weekend, and I'm glad he got P3, because he did have a good weekend. He had a really tough weekend in terms of things going wrong and not going right, and he drove very well. When he says the car was terrible on mediums at the start, it looked to me like Max made a better start, better use of the first corner and the second corner, did he not? But anyway, Max passed him, in other words.
Yes.
I don't think that's anything to do with the tyres. He might say, oh yeah, tires were terrible off the line, or terrible under braking into turn 1, but I don't think they were much better on any of the other cars either, particularly the Red Bull.
Lame game F1 though, but it's a fantastic weekend. I felt like my passion for Formula One had been reignited on the back of a fantastic.
Yeah, to me the most memorable comment though was in Q2, I think. It was on the edge of Q2, and Yuki Tsunoda's race engineer got onto him and said, "Come on, Yuki, you really got to go for it now. You can get it out of yourself. Go for it." And I just thought, that is about the worst thing you can say to Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely shocked that they don't have Yuki Tsunoda at the point now, a sort of Rob Wilson-esque way of saying, right, remember, don't panic, structure the lap, and a few catchwords that in Yuki's mind would trigger
Oh, 100%.
gentle, firm with the brake pedal pressure, make sure I come out of the throttle pedal pressure at the right time, make sure I load the steering at the correct thing on this particular corner, make sure that's what you need to be saying. Just 4 or 5 catchwords that immediately make him focus on the lap, the structure. About the worst thing you can say is somewhere deep down inside you, Yuki, the lap is there. Go for it. Try and find it. What's he going to do? You know, what happened? Duh, he didn't get through to Q3.
Yeah.
I thought that was just incredible, actually. That it's astonishing to me how technical Formula One teams are these days in terms of data acquisition, the running of the car, the people in the garage, the telemetry, the whole thing, the number of people it takes for a startup, all that stuff, everything they do on the start, the clutch, everything else. And yet when it comes actually to managing the driver, it's complete shot in the dark. We know it's somewhere there deep inside your psyche, Yuki. Let's get that lap out of you. You know, it's just like, on the one hand, they're massively digital and technical. On the other, it's just wishful thinking, hoping that magic will happen. And it never does, of course, because there's no magic in racing, as Morris Nine always said.
What word salad, isn't it, Peter? What do those motivational words mean to me? Is what Yuki Tsunoda will be thinking. Stop, just leave me alone, or give me something that I can use that will.
Yeah, I mean, if they said something like, remember, whatever you do, even if you're purple sector 1, sector 2, don't brake too late into turn 70 or whatever they want to say, something logical.
Yeah.
But not just that's deep down inside you. You can get it, Yuki.
What does that mean?
You know, but that's not even a word salad. That's just emotional claptrap, isn't it?
Yeah. It's nonsense. But again, Peter, not with a view not to delve deep into what's wrong with F1. I think.
It's not what's wrong or right. It's the color of F1. It's the tapestry of F1. And I suppose you could say, isn't it good that we have that sort of stuff at one level? On the other level, we have a driver like Oscar Piastri, who doesn't need to be told how to drive a lap. And he's got the structure in his brain before he even starts. And it's all calm and it's all relaxed. And he just gets on with the job. I mean, what a contrast.
Yeah, he's the future of F1 is in good hands.
Well, yeah. And also, you got to say, Ollie Bearmann, wasn't that a great moment when Lewis is sort of sniffing down the inside, and there's Ollie Bearmann with Sir Lewis Hamilton on his left,
incredible,
and he just edges towards the guardrail. I thought, yes,
yeah,
and then I thought that was brilliant. And then what about Franco Colapinto? You know, all this talk about Andrea, what's he called, Kimi Antonelli. Why has he got 3 names? As a matter of fact, everybody's only allowed to have 2 names, aren't they?
Yeah.
Anyway. There's no hyphen between Kimi and Antonelli, is there? I don't want to do him a disservice.
Just his middle name, I think.
Okay, all right. So it's going to be Oscar Jack Piastri from now on.
100%.
Yeah. Anyway, getting back to it, there's a lot of hype, as you say, around Antonelli. He's got to do quite a good job, to do a better job than Franco Colapinto, to be honest. I mean, what a driver. What a cool guy as well. Below the radar, nice bloke. His mum's there. You know, just mega. I love it. And I thought he drove really well. And to be honest, I would have given him driver of the day, considering the car he was in, the performance he put in, and the way he drove. I think he was driver of the day.
It's a good shout. And I think he was in contending. He only got 12% of the vote, as opposed to, I can't take it away.
What's wrong with these people?
I can't take it away from Oscar, Peter. I genuinely think that was a generational bellwether of a drive from Oscar.
Yeah, but his reward, I agree, but his reward was the center of the podium, the points, the acclamation, and everything else. Franco Colapinto was almost forgotten, not almost forgotten by those around the team, obviously, but in terms of global acclaim, he should have something. Give him the driver of the day. That's what the driver of the day should be all about. Shouldn't it? Should be about somebody who gets a reward for something that's a bit under the radar. And for me, that was Colapinto.
I think he gets a worthy mention, but again, it would be disingenuous of me to give him the driver of the day over Oscar Jack Piastri's performance. Peter,
well, I'll remember that next time Charles or Max wins from start to finish and it's a really boring Grand Prix and they give the driver of the day to somebody who finishes 4th, having started last. And I remember that. And when you say, oh, yeah, what a great driver. I'll say, no. Surely the guy that just made the race boring and led from start to finish, surely that should be driver of the day. How many drivers of the day has Max Verstappen not had in the races when he's led from start to finish?
Guilty as charged, Mr. Windsor.
Exactly.
But it's a popularity
How can you
contest.
ever say that the winner of the race isn't the driver of the day if you come down to it?
Agreed. It's always a popularity contest, but that's...
Well, exactly. You know, so my vote is with Franco Colapinto, and I thought he did an outstanding job. And I'd say Ollie Bearmann probably second in that. I thought he was outstanding as
They were
well.
very good, both of them.
Really good. I wonder what Kevin Magnussen thought about that. For sure, knowing K-Mag, he was thinking, oh, yeah, well, I would have been fourth in that race. If
Yeah,
that's
of course
what
he
those
would.
guys do.
As if.
Yeah, I would have
K-Mag,
been up there with Perez taking him out or whatever.
You've
But
had plenty
yeah,
of
you know,
opportunities,
it was, anyway, there we are.
Oh, Peter, you've been a legend. I enjoy these back and forths with you post-race every single time. The insight is levels. If you enjoy the insight and analysis from Peter D. Windsor and you're not subscribed to his YouTube channel, what are you doing with your life genuinely? And thereafter, go over to a podcast
Well, which
platform.
YouTube channel? That's the next thing.
Oh, yeah, this is true. This is true. Peter D. Windsor now in Spanish and Portuguese. Like, what do you mean? Multilingual. Blimey,
We've got one
Peter.
new channel, which is Peter Windsor Brazil, only because I wanted to do a channel for Brazil, I'll say for Brazil, around the Brazilian nation because of the role they played in Formula One. I think they deserve their own YouTube channel. From Emerson Fittipaldi, since then, everything Brazil's done has been excellent. So yeah, there's a Brazilian channel now. So have a look at that. And if you've got any Brazilian mates or you've got any contacts in Brazil, please let them know about that. In the meantime, the other language channels at the moment are on the normal Peter Windsor channel, but we might be doing some other new channels as well.
Got to get them up on new channels, Peter. They'll go gangbusters, I promise you. But, and then the Short Corners podcast again. If you like consuming your Peter Windsor content in audio form, be sure.
Well,
to
downloadable audio form, it's there,
do you know what I mean?
and in normal audio form, you can watch it on YouTube podcasts. We use that platform as well.
There you go. Whatever
the thing about, obviously, about Spotify or Apple is that it is downloadable.
There you go. Whatever the weather, listen to some Peter D. Windsor analysis while you're getting while you're cleaning your house and your bathroom. Do you know what I mean? Whatever the weather. And if you're watching this on the YouTubes, be sure to like and share and drop a comment. And as always, between now and next time, remember, please, to look but never stare.